Okay, I think we'll start in just 30 seconds to give any last stragglers any chance to join, and then we'll start. All right, everybody. Good morning to those of you who are online. Welcome to this panel, the theme of which is innovation and zero hunger. And my colleagues and I are so happy to be able to share with you a little bit of information about what's happening in our region and why innovation and doing things differently, especially when it comes to water, is so important. So by way of introduction, my name is Sibi Lawson, and I live in Nairobi, and I work as a senior advisor to the World Food Programme's Regional Bureau. That regional bureau covers 10 countries. These are Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Sudan, South Sudan, Djibouti, and Eritrea. So quite some complex countries to be working in on this particular issue. But I know I speak for everyone on the panel when I share how delighted we are to really have this opportunity to share some reflections with you. It's a slide, please. So for us, it's a particular moment in time. We are really wrestling with difficult levels of food insecurity. Our food systems are under pressure from many different sides. We haven't really fully recovered from the COVID pandemic, which disrupted our supply chains, and there were losses of livelihoods, many of which have not come back. And we also are struggling with an economic crisis, high prices of food and fuel and fertilizer, really constraining livelihoods and production, linked, of course, to the crisis in the Ukraine. And we're still dealing with climate change related shocks, so prolonged droughts, recurrent droughts that feel like one long drought. But floods, flooding is really an issue in our region, more frequent, more severe, and causing conditions that we have not seen before, rising lake waters, new invasive pest species. So really, it's a very difficult time. We also have demographic pressures on our food systems. Half our continent is under the age of 17 and all looking for jobs. We have a huge wave of rural to urban migration, often looking for jobs that are not there, and the food systems in urban areas are also under crisis. You can see some of the facts and figures there before you. 74.6 million is a huge number of food insecure people. This includes people who are chronically insecure due to lack of jobs or living on degraded lands that constrain their production. Most of the population in our region gets their living and their food directly from the land, so these climate change related shocks hit very differently. And 74.6 million means that in the whole world, 1 out of every 23 hungry people live in our region. So hunger is a very acute issue in our region. We have people who are affected by drought. You can see the figures there. And the rate at which this is increasing is staggering. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It's all to say that this is a very acute issue for us, and it's a very urgent issue for us. So all hands are on deck to address this issue to support the governments, the communities, and the households that are affected. It's worth noting also the very high level of IDPs, refugees, these population movements that separate people from their livelihoods, from their jobs, from their ability to feed themselves. Another characteristic of our region. Slide, please. Slide, please. I wanted to share this slide with you because it, I think, quite illustrates the situation that we find ourselves in as WFP. WFP's mandate and mission is zero hunger. Many of you know us from our humanitarian work, but that's very much the sharp end of the stick. We do humanitarian response when we're not able to do anything else, when the situation is critical and life-threatening, but we know that this is not the answer. We also do things like school feeding and nutrition programs for women and children. So this is a summary of that. If you start on the left side of the slide, in 2017, there were 124 million people who were in need of food assistance. These are global figures. We reached, and reached means we were able to reach them with food or cash or some other form of support. In 2017, out of 124 million people in need, WFP managed to reach 91 million. So that gap was covered by governments, by other actors, churches, NGOs, and so on. If you move to 2019, you will see that out of 135 million, 97 million were able to be reached by WFP assistance. Now look at what happens in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. The needs skyrocket to 272 million, but WFP is only able to reach 116 of those. And this is with incredible increases in funding, in staff and capacities, but not able to keep pace with the increasing needs. If we rush now to 2023, and these figures are from May 2023, by now we have 345 million people who need assistance. This is in addition to what they're getting from their governments, to what they're getting from NGOs and church groups. 345 million people need assistance. WFP is not even able to reach half of them. We are only able to reach 43%. And as I said, this is with billions and billions of dollars of support with incredible capacities on the ground. That gap is getting bigger, and it's going to continue getting bigger exponentially if the trends that we're currently facing continue to occur. For us, this means we need to change how we're doing business, and we have been, and so have other actors in this space. You're going to hear from Eric, you're going to hear from others what's been going on. But what we wanted to highlight for this panel is that we are in a food and hunger crisis of unprecedented magnitude. You see the numbers, whether I've shown you these ones or the ones you saw before. The only thing that will help us overcome this as a global community is being serious about moving to a systems approach. When you start looking at the food system, then you see that one of the major driving causes for this need, for this hunger, for this suffering is water scarcity. Slide. Water scarcity. Thank you. Water scarcity is absolutely fundamental and critical for food security, whether that be for production, for livelihoods. You can see here that our region is one of the most water-stressed regions in the world. And as I said before, it's one of those where the land and the natural resource base are absolutely critical to food security. We are talking about water for livelihoods, and I stress that because you will see that many actors, such as governments, UNICEF, NGOs, ministries of health, focus on water for health, for sanitation, for household use. And that is correct and as it should be. When governments often have to make financial investments in increasing water availability, they will direct that to horticultural farms, to flower farms, or to hotels or other productive investments as they must, because they need to generate money. But we find that in the areas where food security insecurity is often the highest, these are marginalized areas. These are not the most productive areas of the country in terms of generating revenues. And so they're not prioritized for these kinds of investments by governments. I'm speaking broadly about trends. There may be exceptions, but governments are really squeezed in terms of financing and fiscal space to address the issue. And it often falls to external actors, community level actors, actors like the World Wildlife Fund. So we find ourselves finding water security for food security as one of our most critical constraints, and we need innovation. We need new approaches. We need scaling up of what's working, and you're going to hear some of those ideas now. It's not just in the global south, I might add, that the water management system is under stress. It's a global issue, as we know, happening in places like California and in Spain. but the access to the resources and the knowledge and the technologies for how to overcome this are not equitably distributed. And so we have had to be very innovative. We are trying to support other innovators who are on the ground. Local innovation is an incredibly important part of this solution, and affordable, scalable solutions are what we're after. So this is a hugely important issue that we are talking about in these few moments. My colleague Eric will introduce himself and share what his organization has been doing, how they see this situation, and then we'll hand over for some other incredibly interesting, I think, presentations. We'll be open to questions at the end of this presentation. Thank you for your attention as I hand over to Eric. Eric, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sibi, and hello, everybody. Nice joining this session. I'm really happy to be part of this panel to share with you some insights, especially looking at nature-based solutions and how that addresses water security. Just by introduction, my name is Eric Oyare. I work with Worldwide Fund for Nature. I'm based in Nairobi. So CB at the World Food Program is my neighbor. We focus as Blue Heart of Africa in 10 offices where we have presence in terms of freshwater programs and also 7 transboundary landscapes. At Blue Heart of Africa, which is our freshwater vehicle in terms of harmonizing our freshwater work in the continent, we are looking at a vision where we are trying to ensure that our freshwater ecosystems and biodiversity are thriving, and sustainably managed freshwater resources in Africa are supporting sustainable development and coexistence between people and nature. So we are very key to ensure that threats to water resources, aspects of water governance, water allocation frameworks are really enabling conditions that will address water security, which CB has alluded to as a key player in terms of food insecurity, especially in terms of Africa, where a lot of our food production is rain-fed, and because of climate change, we have been seeing, dwindling food productivity, and therefore a huge population of the continent are suffering from hunger. In terms of our nature-based solutions theory of change, we are looking at a situation where Africa is really in dire need and really requires, urgent actions which are nature-centric, actions which are nature-based to be able to, drive resilience building for our communities to be able to adapt to the, increasing risks of climate change. We are faced with a situation where Africa faces a number of critical water challenges, including water scarcity and quality issues. Flooding and coastal erosion has really been ravaging our landscapes, our economies, our cities, our places of our livelihoods, and that has really been very, very significant in terms of driving populations, driving hunger, driving sustainable growth. And this has been, work that WWF has done. As you are seeing on your right, the Waterways to Resilience is a report that WWF did to be able to build the science based around nature-based solution so that we can understand really what is really the science around how we can deliver nature-based solutions and what are we really grappling with. This report, some of the findings which we found out, one is that currently about 25% of African population live in areas with water scarcity. That means that approximately 39% of our Africa GDP is produced within areas which are facing water scarcity risks. Nearly a quarter, or about 25% of our population in the continent, live in areas with acute flooding risks with higher or greater values. And this, therefore, infers that approximately 16% of our gross domestic product as a continent is produced in areas with acute flooding risks. Following that, we are faced again in the current situation where Africa's about 20 largest Africa cities have higher flooding risks rating. That means that urban transport, urban settlements are really impacted. And lastly, we are looking at a situation where droughts and floods cause approximately 70% of disasters and food insecurity related economic losses. And this, by and large, we are seeing contributing to about 80% of deaths in the continent, of course, because of famine, people who are not being reached, because of distribution networks which are poor and not effective. Slide. And because of that situation which we've been facing in the continent that have been displayed, WWF and partners have moved around to really document narratives and cases which we want to share and to build as we build the pipeline for nature-based solution projects as the global north tackles funding to adaptation. Africa, as we've seen the dire need in terms of nature-based solution, we also have to ensure that as we are building at the ecosystem level, at the landscape level, we are guided by science, and therefore we are able to document and be able to rely on what partners have done, the successes in terms of what benefits people have been able to achieve out of nature-based solution programming. One of those is where we are seeing retention dams and water pans have been able to harvest surface runoff water from flooding, thereby providing water security for irrigated agriculture. This is a case where in Yatta, Machakos County in Kenya, a partner called Christian Impact Mission, through the Operation Hunger Out program, have been able to mobilize 6,000 households in an arid and semi-arid area to be able to dig retention water dams, supplying water for irrigation to crops during dry spells, which have now been able to improve yields and therefore guaranteeing, household food security, incomes which are derived out of sales of surplus produce. Number two case which we've been able to document is where native forests are shown to increase flows during dry seasons, which for many ecosystems and water users can be more important than the total annual production. So when you focus, for instance, on reforestation, ensuring that the reforestation program is driven by people who are foresters and who know the kind of tree species to be planted, this has been able to improve water security, especially during dry spells. Removal of non-native trees have consistently resulted in greater production of water within specific watersheds. In a case in point in South Africa, where WWF has been working to remove non-native trees from watersheds, this has been able to provide water for cities and to be able to provide water for irrigated agriculture. And therefore, this has been proven to be cost effective as an intervention in terms of providing water supplies for irrigation. Finally, we've been able to see when we talk of flooding, we talk of floodplains. There have been positive impacts, especially floodplains, because of providing a means to sustainable livelihoods in terms of irrigation and agriculture in areas which are hitherto very dry. Floodplains we've seen, especially in Zambia, where the Lukanga swamps provides a sponge effect to the Kafue River, thereby increasing water flows during dry season because of the swamp, and therefore restoration actions, which WWF and other partners have been able to institute, have been seen to, by and large, in the recent years, in the last almost 5 years, been able to increase water flows into Kafue River, which is almost an artery in terms of water supply in the Zambezi River Basin within the cities, especially Lusaka and Kafue. Slide. Moving from what you may look at as global case studies, regional case studies, local level case studies, WWF in the build-up of nature-based solution pipeline, currently we have about 9 projects which are at different stages, some early stage, some are near investment ready, some already are at offtake in terms of design for implementation. River Nyamwamba in Uganda is one of those where WWF, working with the local office in Uganda, has been able to profile the ecosystem degradation within that landscape, and has been able to, provide a nature-based solutions case and project that has attracted funding from World Bank. The 257 kilometers river catchment within the Nyamwamba River is severely, as the situation dictates, impacted by climate change, which creates a high risk within that region. We've seen incidences of flash flooding, which devastates key infrastructure, including health, transport, education, electricity facilities, as well as affecting vulnerable communities in that region. This has also put, when you look at, the interconnectivity, how river systems affect, for instance, dependencies like cities. We've also seen downstream cities like Kampala being substantially, vulnerable to flooding and inundation of economic and tourist facilities. What WWF has proposed from now the current second phase of funding from the World Bank is to reduce the devastation of the downstream infrastructure by planting bamboo trees and napier grass along the riverbanks, ensure and work with the community and other partners in terms of introducing sustainable land use systems, sustainable agriculture, sustainable livestock management, revegetation, and erosion control through contour farming, which have impacted, for instance, in reducing siltation in the river and ensuring that when it rains, there is no incidences of flash flooding. This has really, in terms of benefits, in the interim over 3 years period that WWF has been collaborating, especially with the Ministry of Water Resources in Uganda, we've been able to see, especially in the city of Kasese, which is just at the midstream of the river, being protected. And in the recent incident, for instance, when there was flash flooding in 2022 September, we saw minimal fatalities compared to the past. Slide. The second case, this is the last one, in terms of the cases which we are profiling out of their portfolio of about 9, is the Lake Baringo and Bogoria in Kenya, which is part of the sub-landscape within the Kenya Reef Lakes region. Here, we've been able to see, the near merger of these two lakes. And what this means is that a saline lake, which is the Lake Bogoria, nearly merging with the Lake Baringo, which is freshwater, and exposing the community, the infrastructure, to greater risks of inundation. What WWF, working in Kenya with partners, including county government and other stakeholders, have been able to propose an integrated program, ecosystem-based, nature-based solution, which is going to protect the public infrastructure and homes from inundation by decreasing, through the actions that we are proposing, the rise in the lake levels by about 1 to 2 centimeters and restoring 13 kilo hectares of degraded land, which is about 20%, with green recovery solutions. This includes restoration of water catchments. So there's been a mapping, working with institutions like the Egerton University. We've mapped the river systems in the sub-landscape, and we are proposing restoration of water catchments, revegetation, reforestation, removal of non-native invasive species, the madenge tree, for those who come from Kenya know, sustainable agriculture and livestock management, erection of barriers to control livestock grazing, and finally introducing water pans, especially to subsidize irrigated agriculture. Slide. Finally, in terms of just relaying our message about nature-based solution and how this can complement large-scale infrastructure, especially addressing water security, be it sinking of boreholes, looking at huge water dams, which are built off our river systems. We are proposing that in addressing water security, we also require a mix of nature-based solution to blend with built infrastructure. Secondly, we are looking at having studied science, having done analysis in terms of the benefits and the cost savings that nature-based solutions provide. We are convinced that nature-based solutions can accelerate adaptation across Africa, especially working with the vulnerable communities, harvesting indigenous knowledge, what communities were doing 20, 30 years ago, that we can bring back nature by ensuring that, for instance, there is sustainable management of our land and natural resources. We are also saying that nature-based solutions can help address Africa water challenges. As CB has alluded to, water security equates to food security, because our agriculture is rain-fed. And therefore, for us, we are saying that we need to work as multi-stakeholders to really profile and build and implement and finance, look for financing for nature-based solution, because the only way out for us out of climate change as Africa is to build adaptation and resilience. Mitigation strategies will work, but Africa, I think our way out as WWF is to build adaptation. And how do we build adaptation? Is by bringing back nature. Finally, we want to say that as partners, we require investment and scaling up of efforts around nature-based solution and other mechanisms that ensure that there is sustainable development. The only way out is to look at, for instance, currently, when we are looking at a global scale, nearly about 6% of climate funding goes to adaptation. And out of that, a paltry 0.5% goes to nature-based solutions. And therefore, we need to lobby and advocate in the coming COP28 in UAE. Let's work on institutional arrangements, on mechanisms of financing to propel and build architecture to increase funding and uptake of that funding to address nature-based solution, to address water security, to address food security. I'll now hand over to my colleague Bedan Mwathi, who will focus more on innovations to address food security. Over to you, Bedan.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you so much, CB, as well. We've sort of seen that how big our problem is, and we've seen that there's the potential of nature-based solution in helping us address some of these challenges. And I'll do an overview of how we've identified innovators in the region who are actually helping do that. So my name is Bidan Modi, as previously mentioned, and I work at the Ignite Innovation Hub of Vision Africa. So the Ignite Innovation Hub is a joint collaboration between WFP and CARE Denmark, and our goal is basically to help to achieve sustainable food systems by harnessing local solutions to local problems. As you can see through the beautiful slide we have here, this is our theory of change, and we focus on 3 main activities. So these are food systems innovation, ecosystem support, collective learning on innovation, and innovation culture strengthening. And these 3 activities are meant to have the bigger impact of ensuring that food systems in East Africa are climate resilient, inclusive, and locally led. So that's our overall, those are the activities that we do, and that's the impact that we intend to have. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the activities and programs that we currently have running. So we have a number of programs, some of which we've already conducted, some of which we're in the process of launching, and some of which are actively learning. So for instance, you have the Ignite Food Systems and Climate Innovation Challenge, and this is something that has happened in South Sudan, Rwanda, and Uganda. It's currently happening in Rwanda and Uganda for the 2nd phase, and we are planning to launch it in Somalia and Ethiopia. And the whole idea behind the Ignite Food Systems and Climate Innovation Challenge is to identify innovators who are addressing challenges in their local food systems, and basically providing technical support to these innovators as well as funding their ventures. In this challenge, we identify innovators who've actually tested or who've taken their innovations to the market and tested them. So there's viability. And now when we actually provide the funding and technical support, we enable them to scale these solutions. There's the Ignite Seed Incubator, which you'll see in my last slide. But this specific program aims to identify early stage ideas that address food system challenges. And then these ideas are research backed. And now we help prototype and test, ensure, basically validate these ideas for the innovators. So we're in the process of launching the next one. And we're in the process of launching it, and we will do it in September. And I'll highlight that in a slide that I'll show later. We have the Ignite Research and Development Labs, and this is a partnership between COCO and DTU. And with this specific program, we aim to look at innovators who require prototyping and testing support, especially when it comes to engineering, and they're able to actually build and test some of these innovations to validate that they work. So this is a joint partnership between DTU and COCO. And then we have the aflatoxin systems change, and this happens across Eastern Africa. So we currently have it in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Rwanda. And the whole idea behind the aflatoxin system change is ideally to help in detection, testing, and even basically testing of grains to ensure they don't have aflatoxin, and even in treatment. And this is something that we are currently running. Finally, we have the Youth Innovation Program, and that's currently happening in Kenya. And this aims to actually strengthen local innovators by working in collaboration with county-level innovation centers across Kenya. So ideally, we are working with young people to help them build and scale their innovations when it comes to addressing food systems challenges. All these programs have different partners, as you can see, and we do this basically using funding from USAID and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, Danida. So that's an overview of the programs that we have active at the moment. So next slide. So in the next slide, I show you an overview of what Ignite Innovation challenges look like. So I'm spotlighting the Ignite Innovation challenges that I highlighted before. And this program has been running for the last couple of years. Specifically, we have Rwanda, Uganda, and South Sudan that we launched previous programs, and then Rwanda and Uganda, where we actually have programs running at the moment. So all this, in all these countries, we've identified innovators and actually provided equity-free grants. So for instance, you can see in Rwanda that we have up to 14 innovators who've received 500,000 USD in equity-free grants. You have Uganda, where we identified 8 innovators who received 300,000, and we're in the process of identifying 6 innovators in the current Ignite program that recently closed. Where the call for application recently closed. In South Sudan, we worked with 9 innovators where they received up to 200,000 USD in equity-free grants. And we have one of the innovators in our call today who will be sharing some of basically his innovation and what they are solving in South Sudan. Then finally, we have Ethiopia and Somalia, which are currently in the pipeline, and they address the same themes. We are trying to see how can we identify innovators who are addressing challenges in their food systems, and they're addressing, they're ensuring they're building climate resilience. And now, in the same way, we'll provide technical support and funding to these specific innovators. So look out for these 2 countries where we will inform you once we launch them. If you go to the next slide, so you can go to the next slide. I give you an overview of some of the innovators that we have in our region, and specifically those that address water innovations. So they, as the Ignite Innovation Hub works across the region, you'll see innovators from Rwanda, South Sudan, and basically the entire region. So in Rwanda specifically, we have the high yield aquaponics systems where you have which basically uses digital monitoring to increase yields and reduce costs and waste. And that's an innovation by UKC that's specifically targeting smallholder farmers. You have the innovators that are targeting livelihoods. And a good example is the Vijana Toweza that's using fish ponds to farm tilapia and catfish. And basically they farm insects that they use as fish feed. And this is something that's happening in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. We have H2Grow, and H2Grow uses a soilless and water-efficient agricultural technique, enabling people to grow plants in harsh environments using hydroponics. That's something that we are currently running and testing in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda. Then in South Sudan, we have the Water Hyacinth project, where we have innovators who are building affordable cooking fuel, and these are briquettes using water hyacinth, which is actually invasive. So they are solving the challenge of basically they're solving the challenge of the environment while finding a use for the product as well. The final one that I want to highlight is Rainmaker, who have solar-powered water supply systems for agriculture and tractor for hire in South Sudan. And these are innovators that we've actually worked with across the region, and we funded them, and we are actually in close collaboration with them. At this point, I'll hand over to one of the innovators that I mentioned that we have, and that's Rainmaker. So James is with us in the call. And James, this is over to you. So you can go to the next slide.
You're good, Hi, James? Everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Beden. And hello, everyone. My name is James. My dear, I'm calling in from Juba, South Sudan. today. And I would like to pick it up from where my colleagues left it. And that is highlighting within the context base of South Sudan what the key challenges are, especially in connection to water and food security, and with the overarching challenge of climate change. In South Sudan, the key challenge that climate change poses is really immense, especially in a country where 95% of the population depend on rain-fed agriculture, rain-fed subsistence agriculture. This vast population is highly impacted by issues of climate change, particularly drought, as you will see on the next slide. Please. The challenge of climate change really is creating a lot of challenges in South Sudan, where over 2 million people are internally displaced and have lost livelihoods due to extreme floods or extreme droughts. And this is a key challenge that is affecting food security in the country. On the next slide. You will see that the social enterprise organization that I started and is running now with a very community here in South Sudan, and we are proud to partner with the World Food Program through the Ignite Food Systems Challenge, also as well as through the innovation in Munich. We have been able to find a durable solution that is locally led by the community members that are affected by these issues that are being highlighted here today. We are implementing solar-powered water supply systems for regenerative agriculture so that people can be more self-reliant, where we depend on locally available resources. We all know that the sun in South Sudan, as I speak with you, is nearly like 40 degrees in South Sudan. It's very hot, but it's also an opportunity. And this is what Rainmaker is tapping into to ensure that we provide durable solution to the local people, led by us, because we understand the key challenges that people are actually facing. That's the schematic design of how the system works. But on the next slide, I would like to show you how we are actually like doing this practically. One of the key challenges now with floods and droughts is that we also have, when we talk about adaptation, we also have to talk about the crops that are resistant to some of these key challenges posed by climate change. In South Sudan, we are actually lucky to have a crop like sorghum as a staple food crop for within the whole country. And this is a crop that is resistant to floods as well as to droughts, and ensuring that smallholder farmers are empowered to grow this crop is an important measure towards the challenges that we are experiencing with food insecurity. On the next slide, I would like to show you also another measure that we are using, especially with the key challenge of floods that have devastated the country over the last 4 years. It's only this year that the challenge has changed to drought, but the last 4 years were floods displacing people, destroying crops. And so, as you see there, that is one of our key undertaking, and that is tractor for hire services that we use to provide mechanized farming services to smallholder farmers so that they can actually increase the acreage that they are farming, especially as climate change challenges them, and particularly introducing new crops that were not grown in the country before. What you are seeing there is rice field that we cultivated this year in partnership with ADRA. I'm seeing on the call someone from ADRA Ethiopia is on the call, but we did this with ADRA South Sudan, and we cultivated about 50 acres of rice field through our tractor for hire services, and we are going to see how this, because this is a new way that we have to enable the communities to adapt to the challenges that are posed by climate change, and especially in particular with either excessive water through floods or less water through drought. We have to be really mindful and see, as we predict how the weather is going to be next year, then we accordingly plant some of the crops that will be adaptable to that particular weather during that particular season. On the next slide, I would like to show you the kind of impact that my organization, Rainmaker Enterprise, that partnered with World Food Program, has been able to accomplish in South Sudan. As we talk about the issue of water, a lot of people in South Sudan, more than 2/3 of the country, still lack access to clean drinking water. Through our work, we've been able to, so far, to provide over 16,000 people with clean drinking water. And that, as you all know, water is the difference between poverty and prosperity. And when you have water infrastructure, the ripple effects can be felt by the communities. We have been able to even increase the local food production. We produce through our programs over 15,000 metric tons of food that is produced locally. There are so many benefits of that nutritionally and also in terms of employment opportunities that you can provide, where we have, for instance, provided over 100 job opportunities to women and youth that are impacted by the challenges of climate change and food insecurity. We have been able to increase the land productivity and productivity of the people more than 12 times, because mind you, during the dry season, which is the longest season in South Sudan, many people just wait for the next rainy season. But through our irrigation programming, we've been able to now have more than 2 seasons in a year, and have been able to provide productivity to the land and to the people that would rather just sit there, wait for the next season, which is not actually predictable anymore. We are also incorporating, like how our brother was talking about, nature-based solutions. We are incorporating agroforestry, the local smallholder farmers, on how important it is to actually intercrop their crops with fruit-bearing trees and other indigenous trees that can enhance the soil fertility, as well as restore degraded soils. These are some of the things that we are doing, and I want to let you know on this call today that when you work, you can increase more than 3 times the impact that can actually be felt by the communities impacted by the challenges we are talking about. So I urge you to invest in local innovators within the region to address the key challenge of water insecurity, as well as the resulting food insecurity in the region. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for that, James. Thank you for that, James. I think that was straight from the horse's mouth in terms of what's the impact of some of these solutions and investing in local innovators. The last thing that I wanted to highlight is we have an open call for innovation, and this is something you should look out for in September, that we will be looking for early stage food security and climate resilience innovations, and this ideally will be research backed. So we are looking at people who are in institutions of higher learning, who have ideas that they haven't tested and they would like to test. So be on the lookout for this, and if you have any networks that you can share it to, kindly do that. I'll hand over to CB to facilitate the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, all 3 of you. Really fascinating presentations. Incredible what you've already accomplished, and very exciting what you may yet still accomplish. So we wanted to encourage anybody who's listening in to either put your hand up, come off mic, and ask a question of any of the presenters. And in the meantime, Eric, if we can invite you to turn your camera back on, we have a question for you already. The first question is, you did mention that nature-based solutions and nature-based approaches are a very important part of your strategy. Can you tell us how these have incorporated indigenous knowledge? I noticed that you said harvest indigenous knowledge all along the way. Could you give us some examples of what you meant by indigenous knowledge in our region? And secondly, what do you think are the most impactful community level actions that can be taken when we're planning for NBS? We've talked about on this panel and indeed in many other fora that nature-based solutions are appropriate for our context. Not that they don't require investments and scaling and training and so on, but that they can be implemented effectively often at a community level. So maybe you can fold both of those into your answers and shed some light. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sibi. My camera is on, so yeah, and really great questions. So I think that the two questions are a coin, but two sides, and I look at it in this way. In originating, developing, looking for resourcing and implementing nature-based solutions, the voices of the indigenous community is key. The voices of the local community is key. So at WWF, we have a classification which looks at IPLC, indigenous people and local community. And by our constitutional frameworks, our laws, we understand, in terms of layman, we understand indigenous communities are people who live within these natural ecosystems, people who cohabit these natural ecosystems, live within adjacent and manage these natural ecosystems for their benefit in terms of food security, livelihoods, and other means of living. So these are people, for instance, Kenya, where I come from, you'll go to Rift Valley, for instance, Baringo, where recently a month ago we held with the county government of Baringo and Elgeyo Marakwet, an integrated program designed to look at how do we manage the rising lake levels. As I had mentioned earlier, we had invitations from the Ogiek community, which are people who live within some of these natural ecosystems in this sub-landscape. And so how have we been able to incorporate? The question is, how have we been able to incorporate indigenous knowledge into our nature-based solutions programming? The first thing we do is social profiling. We go to the community as we are designing a nature-based solution. So part of the process running in parallel with the design process as we engage in multi-stakeholder platforms, speak to the county government, speak to line ministries, speak to other organizations working this. Running parallel to that is a social profiling, which really looks at the social dynamics. So who are the indigenous people, who are the youths, who are the women, what are their characteristics, how have they been coping in terms of with climate change, how have they been coping with water insecurity, how have they been, for instance, what are the local practices, which, from a conservation narrative, we can relate with in terms of bringing back nature. Because our focus is basically, we are saying, look, 20, 30 years ago, our streams, our springs were flowing. We had, for instance, when you go to Kilimanjaro, the footsteps of Kilimanjaro, the community down there, Masai will tell you, at a certain period, they had almost 40 springs oozing water from the footsteps of the mountain. But now, hardly you can count 5. Now, that tells you that something has happened. A land use, land cover change system aggravated by climate change has happened. And therefore, you need to understand how are communities living with the nature before? And how can you harvest that knowledge? The practices, how do communities used to practice farming? How did they used to manage their livestock? They used to have actually holistic rangeland management. They used to have planned grazing. What has happened now? So sometimes people talk about climate change. Yes, climate change is with us, but it is purely land use, land cover change. I can cite, not maybe in his exact words, but the leader of the Ogiek community in Baringo said, don't tell us, and he told us, you scientists talk to us about science, climate change. What is ailing us is people have cut down trees. He said, period. We are a community who used to live in forest. What we are saying is people have cut down trees, people have cut down shrubland, there is a lot of charcoal burning, and that is what is ailing us. So that kind of knowledge is very paramount as we're building nature-based solutions. I can speak on this CB for the whole day, but let me move to the next.
Very important. Thank you, Eric. I think you've answered both the questions extremely clearly and
I think there are a few items I wanted just to mention in passing. So okay. How do we incorporate, what are the frameworks? So WWF, we have what we are calling environmental and social safeguards framework. We have what we are calling gaining and obtaining local license and we have a multi-stakeholder platform development that also incorporates, doesn't just look at the WFPs, the organization run by Bedan. No, we also look at how is local community mobilized, how are they grouped, how are they structured, and how can we bring their representation into the multi-stakeholder platform for implementation of tech. So we're also looking at when we implement nature-based solution, it is not only a business of WWF, it's not only a business of the hydrologists from the Ministry of Water, it is also a function of the local community. They are the owners of the land. Thank you.
Really important, Eric, those last 2 points. And I think the environmental and social safeguarding in many communities, organizations, governments, increasingly important, increasingly strictly applied, rather in a systematic way, very important. I also noted what you said about gaining local consent, obtaining local license, tapping into these practices. I also have a colleague that I work with who always says, yes, we should look at the sky to see if it's raining or not, but we should also look at the ground. And he's talking about the degraded lands and how what you said about land use has changed, land cover has changed, and that's making these climate shocks even worse. Really interesting and important message. I hope everyone who has tuned into this has taken that away at least as one of our main points. I have a question for James, if James is still online. James is mentioned, someone wants to know a very practical question. These are my favorite kind of questions. Why are you going to tractors, James, this person wants to know, that increase our carbon footprint and are also subject to many mechanical difficulties? Would it not be better to go to oxen? James, if you'd like to take that one. And we do have time for, I think, one more question, and we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. Feel free to drop any chats or questions in the chat. But James, if you're around to take that one. James is reaching us from a place where connectivity is not guaranteed.
Thank you, Sylvia.
There he is,
Yeah.
Thank goodness. Over to you, James. Why are you going to tractors when we have oxen?
Yeah, that's a very good practical question, as you put it, CB. And it's a question that when we were actually designing this project, we talked about it with the communities as well as with the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator Munich. We had like a very lengthy discussion about it, and I'm glad that you saw that and it came up as well. There are limitations with oxen. For example, like the slide that I showed you where we were actually plowing for the rice field, that area is a barren land and very difficult for like the oxen to pull the plow and break the ground. So those limitations still prevent the smallholder farmers from increasing the acreage and increasing their food production, right? When you talk about the question, and this was what I said to our funder, and it's good that this is actually being organized by World Food Program. I asked a very simple question, and this came from the communities, because the need for the tractor came from the community. And we brought it and we packaged it together and we said, okay, how are we going to do it? Because not everybody is going to have a tractor. No one can afford, these are smallholder farmers, 1 acre, 2 acres. They cannot afford like a tractor to cultivate with. So you're looking at the kind of carbon footprint that you are raising there is very minimal. I don't know maybe where the person raising the question is living, but I can tell you right now, my office alone where I'm sitting, I have more carbon footprint than that one tractor that is serving over 500 smallholder farmers, right? Because I have a fridge in the office, I have the water running, that needs to be warm or cold. I have computers in the office and all this. So when you look at the carbon footprint, you cannot punish a smallholder farmer that is leasing a service and not actually buying a tractor. We don't have 500 tractors. We have 1 tractor for 500 smallholder farmers. And we have mechanics that have been trained, local people from the community themselves, that run these kind of services for the smallholder farmers. So yes, it's a valid question, but at the grand scheme of things, I think we need to ask ourselves other questions, like what are we doing even at our own individual homes to reduce the carbon footprints? and not like what having services that are working as on a subscription or a leasing model for a group of people. So the benefits outweigh on a scale the risk that you raise. Thank you so much.
Fantastic answer. And that's another one that we could debate for hours. Very, very, very interesting and a fair question. I hope that just this little time that we were able to secure has been helpful to those of you who are listening, stimulating, interesting. You've seen how we're innovating around what even an agency like WFP has to do to address food security and water security. You've heard about the programming innovations that the WWF is disseminating. You've heard about how the Innovation Hub is reaching out to local innovators, and you've heard from James what some of those innovations actually look like. And I think we're all three saying to you, four of us, you will get results if you innovate. It's not a risky business. In fact, it's risky not to innovate. And we are really listening to what you've said, Eric, about working with the community in a genuine, meaningful way, not just giving lip service to it. And James, I really took note of what you said about working with the community in the design of this program, down to what implements are used and what's grown. I also appreciated your involvement of women. I noticed that throughout the presentation. Women are at the heart of the food system and really linked to water. We need to innovate around some gender transformation of how we do business. I will look to see if there's one last question in the chat. Now we've got 5 minutes left. Thanks to all of you, especially the presenters, for making the time to put this together, those in front of the camera and those behind the scenes. We are wishing everyone who's on the ground in Stockholm a very wonderful water week from Nairobi.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.